The steel handles of the bolt cutters dug into my palms. Sweat stung the corners of my eyes. The afternoon heat trapped inside the Manoa Valley garage felt like breathing through a wet towel. I leaned my weight forward and squeezed. The rusted iron padlock snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The faded blue cooler had been wrapped in layers of silver tape and shoved behind a stack of rotting drywall. My stepmother, Sylvia, had moved out 2 days ago. She left behind bags of trash, broken patio chairs, and this box. She thought she had hidden it well. She thought I would just pay a haul-away service to clear the garage and never look twice. Tires crunched the loose gravel in the driveway. The shadow of a lifted truck stretched across the concrete floor. Trent stepped out. He shut the heavy door with a metallic thud. He wore a crisp linen shirt and a titanium dive watch he did not buy himself. He was 34, 2 years older than me, carrying the specific confidence of a man whose mother always fixed his mistakes. "Put the cutters down, Donna," he said. He stopped at the edge of the shade. "Mom left that box by mistake. It is her old tax filings. I am here to grab it." My day job involves managing a boutique hotel in Kaimuki. You learn to handle difficult people by letting silence do the heavy work. I did not look at him. I pulled the snapped padlock from the latch and let it drop. It hit the concrete an inch from his leather loafers. I lifted the lid. The smell of mildew and stale paper drifted up. Hundreds of envelopes, tightly bound with rubber bands, filled the cooler to the brim. The top letter caught the light. The printed text was unmistakable. Donatella Murphy. "Odd place to keep my mail, Trent," I said. My voice held flat. He shifted his weight. His eyes darted to the open cooler. "It is just junk mail, old catalogs. She was going to shred it, close the lid, and step away." I picked up a thick bundle. The United States Postal Inspection Service has a precise definition for the retention of another citizen's mail. It carries a 5-year penalty per envelope. I let the rubber band snap against the paper. There are at least 300 envelopes in here. You do the math. His jaw tightened. Unlike Sylvia, Trent lacked polished restraint. His hands balled into fists, but the threat of a federal penalty anchored his feet to the ground. He took a half step back and pulled his phone from his pocket. "You are making a mistake," he muttered. He turned toward his truck and dialed a number before he even reached the driver's side door. He did not look back as he reversed into the street. I listened to the engine fade down the valley road. The wind rustled the palm fronds outside. Welcome back to Pan of Vengeance, where the quiet ones always have the last word. If you have ever watched someone try to erase your existence, hit subscribe and tell me your age in the comments. You will want to stay for this one. I knelt on the dusty floor and pulled a cream-colored envelope from the center of the pile. The return address belonged to a corporate insurance firm in Seattle. The postmark was dated 3 years ago, right around the time my father received his final diagnosis. I slid my thumb under the flap and tore the paper. I expected a standard medical bill. I found a life insurance policy notice instead. The document listed my name as the sole beneficiary. The payout was $150,000. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with a stove that only has 3 working burners. I work 60 hours a week, making sure tourists have fresh towels and cold drinks. That kind of money alters the trajectory of a life. It pays off debts. It buys time. Sylvia had known about it for 3 years. She kept it buried under layers of tape next to the lawnmower. But she did not just bury it. I tipped the envelope upside down. A folded sheet of printer paper slipped out and fluttered to the concrete. It was an email thread. The sender address read Donna Murphy, 808. I have never owned an email account with that name. The message was addressed to the insurance firm claims department. I am formally declining the policy payout. Please cease all correspondence to my father's address. My chest went tight. Sylvia had not merely intercepted the letter. She had manufactured a digital identity to refuse the money in my name. She wanted the policy to default back into the general estate where she could claim it as the surviving spouse. I sat back on my heels. The heat of the garage pressed in, but my skin ran cold. For 15 years, Sylvia used a sweet voice and island hospitality to convince the world she was a saint. She brought macadamia nut bread to the neighbors. She smiled at church. She played the perfect grieving widow when my father took his last breath, all while running a calculated financial blockade right under his roof. I stacked the letters back into the cooler. I did not throw things. I did not scream into the empty garage. Anger is a cheap fuel that burns out fast. What I felt was something much older and much harder. It was the quiet clarity of a woman who just realized she had been playing a rigged game her entire life. I picked up the snapped padlock, put it in my pocket, and carried the first stack of letters to my car. I carried the heavy plastic cooler up 2 flights of exterior concrete stairs to my Kaimuki apartment. The evening heat held tight to the pavement. A moped whined down Wailai Avenue, mixing with the smell of garlic shrimp from the corner lunch wagon. I unlocked my door and dragged the cooler onto the faded linoleum floor of my kitchen. My apartment is small. The refrigerator hums too loudly. The window unit air conditioner rattles if you run it past medium. I spend my days managing luxury suites that cost more per night than my monthly rent. I smile at tourists who complain about the thread count of their sheets, while I calculate whether I can afford new brakes for my car this month. I sat at my cramped Formica dining table and spread the first batch of documents under the overhead light. The $150,000 life insurance policy sat in the center. $150,000. I traced the raised ink of the corporate letterhead. That number represented a down payment on a house. It represented breathing room. It represented the ability to sleep through the night without grinding my teeth over utility bills. My father set that money aside for me. He paid the premiums. He named me the sole beneficiary. Sylvia intercepted the notification the week he received his terminal diagnosis. I picked up the printed email thread again. The burner account Donna Murphy 808 had corresponded with the Seattle claims adjuster 4 separate times. I read the messages carefully. Sylvia had adopted a curt, dismissive tone. She wrote that I wanted nothing to do with my father or his money. She stated I was living out of state and had no interest in filing the claim paperwork. The strategy was cold and precise. If a beneficiary formally refuses a payout or cannot be located after a statutory period, the funds revert to the primary estate. Sylvia was the executor of the primary estate. She was starving the policy out, waiting for the clock to run down so the insurance company would cut the check directly to her. She forged my identity to rob me of my inheritance. But as I dug deeper into the faded blue cooler, the financial theft began to look like a secondary crime. I sliced open the rubber bands holding the next bundle of envelopes. These did not bear corporate logos. They were personal. They were varied in size and color. Some were greeting cards. Some were standard white envelopes. All of them bore my name written in familiar, slanting handwriting. My father had a distinct way of crossing his T letters. He always dragged the line a little too far to the right. I stared at the ink. My hands grew remarkably still. I opened a blue envelope first. It was a birthday card from 5 years ago, my 27th birthday. Inside, a crisp $50 bill was taped to the paper. The note read, "I know you are busy with the hotel, but I hope you buy yourself a nice dinner. Love, Dad." Sylvia had told me he forgot that year. She called me the day after my birthday, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy, saying James was just getting older and his memory was slipping. She said I should not take it personally. I spent that night crying in my car behind the hotel. I opened another envelope. This one was thicker. The date on the postmark was from my college graduation. I had paid my own way through a hospitality management degree on the mainland. My father did not attend the ceremony. Sylvia had sent me a text message saying his back was acting up and he could not handle the flight. Inside the envelope was a graduation card and a voided cashier check for $5,000. The note attached was written on his personal stationery. "Donatella, I am so proud of you. I bought a ticket, but Sylvia said you requested a limit on family tickets so your friends could attend. I understand. You have your own life now. Use this for your first apartment. I read the words 3 times. The air in my kitchen felt thin. I never limited the tickets. I had reserved 3 front-row seats for my family. I stared at those empty chairs during the entire commencement address. I pulled a letter dated 3 years ago. The handwriting was shakier. The ink pressed harder into the paper as if his hand trembled while he wrote. Donatella, it has been 6 months since you answered my calls. Sylvia tells me you requested space. She says the hotel promotion is stressing you out and you do not want to be bothered with my health updates. I am trying to respect your boundaries, but my heart is failing. I just want to hear your voice. Did I do something wrong? The paper crumpled slightly under my fingers. The betrayal settled into my bones like lead. Sylvia did not just hide a life insurance policy. She built a wall of silence between a dying man and his only daughter. When my father became too weak to drive to the post office, he trusted his wife to mail his letters. She took them from his hands, promised they were on their way, and carried them straight to the garage. She threw them in a cooler and taped it shut. Then she picked up his phone, deleted my incoming text messages, and blocked my number. She told him I did not care. She told me he was too tired to speak. She created a perfect, hermetically sealed bubble of miscommunication. I sat in the quiet of my apartment. I thought about the last time I saw him in the hospital. He was unconscious, connected to a ventilator. Sylvia stood by the bed, weeping for the nurses, resting her manicured hand on his arm. She had orchestrated the entire tragedy. My father died believing I abandoned him. I lived for years believing he replaced me with Trent. The grief I had carried for 6 months hardened into something else. Grief is heavy and slow. What I felt now was sharp. It was a cold, unbreakable resolve. I was not going to cry anymore. Crying was for victims, and I refused the role. I started sorting the envelopes into precise categories: financial documents on the left, personal correspondence in the middle, evidence of identity theft on the right. I photographed every envelope, every postmark, and every forged signature using my phone. I backed the files up to a cloud server. I moved with the efficiency of a hotel manager preparing for an audit. At the very bottom of the cooler, beneath a stack of old holiday catalogs Sylvia used to weigh down the letters, I found one last document. It was not sealed in an envelope. It was a folded legal notice printed on heavy, watermarked paper. It had been sent to my father's address, but directed to the attention of the executor of the estate. I unfolded it. The letterhead belonged to David Harrison, an estate attorney located in downtown Honolulu. The letter referenced the life insurance policy I had just found. But the context was wrong. The attorney was writing to Sylvia, warning her about her repeated attempts to force the policy into default. I read the second paragraph, tracing the text with my index finger. Mrs. Murphy, we must advise you that allowing the secondary life insurance policy to default to the primary estate will trigger a mandatory audit of the grandfather trust. As you are aware, James Murphy was merely a silent trustee of the Waikiki Property Registry. Upon his death, those assets do not transfer to you. They transfer directly to the named beneficiary. Any suspicious financial activity regarding the life insurance may flag the larger asset transfer. Please govern yourself accordingly. I stopped reading. The words grandfather trust and Waikiki Property Registry stared back at me. My father did not own property in Waikiki. He worked as an operations manager for a shipping company. We lived in a modest house in Manoa Valley. He drove a 10-year-old sedan. I read the paragraph again. The attorney was warning Sylvia. He knew she was trying to steal the $150,000, and he was telling her to back off before she accidentally drew attention to something much bigger. A secondary asset, something that transferred directly to the named beneficiary, me. The insurance policy was a distraction. It was a rounding error. Sylvia was playing a dangerous game to steal cash, but she was trying to keep a much larger door closed. I looked at the clock on my stove. It was past midnight. The city outside was quiet. I picked up the attorney letter and placed it on top of the financial pile. Tomorrow morning, David Harrison was going to have an unannounced visitor, and Sylvia was going to learn that a locked door is useless when you leave the blueprint on the table. I stared at the watermark on the lawyer letter. The city outside my window slipped into the deep quiet of the early morning hours. To understand how a woman executes a high-level financial fraud, you have to understand how she practices. Sylvia did not wake up one day and decide to steal my inheritance. She spent 18 years running a slow, quiet demolition inside my childhood home. She moved into the Manoa Valley house when I was 14. My mother had been gone for 4 years. My father was lonely. He carried that distinct, heavy silence common among men who do not know how to process grief. Sylvia arrived like a tropical storm disguised as a warm breeze. She brought her 12-year-old son, Trent, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The neighbors thought my father had won the lottery. Sylvia was a master of weaponized aloha. She threw lavish luau's in our backyard on holiday weekends. She bought extravagant plumeria leis for every guest. She roasted kalua pork and poured sweet cocktails and played the perfect island hostess. The community adored her. They saw a generous, vibrant woman bringing life back to a tragic household. They did not see what happened when the guests drove home and the front door clicked shut. Sylvia understood that to take over a territory, you must first erase the previous occupants. The family photos on the living room mantelpiece were the first casualties. When she moved in, the shelves held candid snapshots of my childhood, school pictures, beach days with my father. Within 6 months, those frames vanished. They were replaced by professional studio portraits featuring Sylvia James and Trent. They wore matching white linen shirts on a pristine beach. I was not in the photos. Sylvia had scheduled the photo shoot on a Saturday afternoon when she knew I had a mandatory high school track meet. She told my father I was too busy with sports and did not want to skip my event for a boring family portrait. My father accepted the excuse. The physical displacement followed the visual erasure. My bedroom sat on the second floor facing the lush green ridge of the valley. It was the best room in the house. One afternoon, I came home from school to find my belongings packed into cardboard boxes in the hallway. The scent of fresh paint burned my nostrils. Sylvia stood in the doorway holding a clipboard. Her voice was drenched in artificial sweetness. "Donna, sweetheart, Trent needs a larger space for his computer equipment. He is a growing boy. We moved your things to the downstairs guest room. It has its own entrance. You are so independent anyway. I figured you would love the privacy." The downstairs room shared a wall with the laundry machines. It smelled like damp earth and bleach. The windows were narrow slits near the ceiling. When I brought it up to my father at dinner, Sylvia reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "James, she is a teenager," she told him, her tone gentle and reasonable. "She wants her own domain away from us old folks. Do not crowd her." My father looked at me. I waited for him to defend my place in the house. Instead, he offered a weak nod and returned to his meal. That was the moment I realized Sylvia had found his blind spot. She framed my exile as a favor to me. Her masterpiece of erasure involved a much smaller object. When I turned 10, my father took me to a local artisan market on the North Shore. He bought me a carved sea turtle made of rich, dark koa wood. The artisan had polished the shell until it gleamed like liquid glass. My father handed it to me and said the sea turtle navigates the entire ocean, but always knows how to find its way home. I kept it on the center of my desk for 4 years. It was my most prized possession. A year after Sylvia moved in, the turtle disappeared. I searched my damp downstairs room for 2 days. I finally found it in a dusty cardboard box in the garage labeled miscellaneous junk. I carried the wooden carving into the kitchen. Sylvia was arranging imported orchids in a crystal vase. I asked her why my turtle was in the trash box. She did not flinch. She did not stop arranging the flowers. "Oh, honey," she murmured, adjusting a white petal. "I am redecorating the main living areas. We are going for a modern, coastal chic aesthetic. That old carving just clashes with the decor. Keep it in your room if you want, but it cannot stay out here." She reduced a symbol of my father's love to a decorative inconvenience. I took the turtle back to my room and placed it in the back of my closet. I never put it on display again. That was her strategy. She cut the ties between my father and me one thread at a time. She intercepted conversations the same way she would later intercept the life insurance policy. She told him I was too busy. She told him I was aloof. She spun a narrative of a rebellious, ungrateful daughter who preferred the company of strangers over her own flesh and blood. She did not yell. She did not hit. She just smiled until I disappeared. Over the years, the gap widened. I moved out for college and barely looked back. I secured my job at the hotel and built a life that required nothing from them. I thought my father was content with his new family. I thought the silence from his end was a mutual agreement. I sat at my Kaimuki kitchen table, staring at the stack of hidden birthday cards. He had tried to bridge the gap. He had tried to find his way home, just like the koa wood turtle. But Sylvia stood at the door and locked him inside. The memory of her passive psychological theft faded, blending into a much sharper, much colder recollection. The ultimate act of erasure. The day that proved Sylvia viewed me not just as a nuisance, but as a threat to be eliminated. It was a Tuesday evening 6 months ago. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. A nurse pulled me aside and told me my father had suffered a final, catastrophic heart failure. He was gone. Sylvia was already in the room. She wore a dark sweater, her makeup perfectly smudged to convey elegant grief. She wept openly, holding on to Trent. I stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. Sylvia looked up. Her eyes met mine. Through the tears, her gaze was hard and calculating. The next morning, I drove to the Manoa Valley house to collect a few of my father's personal items. The familiar gravel crunched under my tires. The morning sun illuminated the green ridge behind the roof. I walked up the wooden steps and slid my old brass key into the front door lock. The cylinder refused to turn. I pulled the key out and checked the grooves. I pushed it back in and applied pressure. The metal ground against the pins. The lock was brand new. The shiny silver finish stood out against the faded brass plate. The door swung open from the inside. Sylvia stood on the threshold wearing a crisp black linen dress. She held a cup of coffee. Her posture was relaxed, but her grip on the ceramic mug was tight. "Your key does not work anymore, Donatella," she said. Her voice carried the same artificial sweetness she used when she packed up my childhood bedroom. I stared at the new deadbolt. "You changed the locks less than 12 hours after he died." "Your father wanted Trent and me to have peace," she replied, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "He knew this would be difficult. He wanted to secure our future. This is our house now. I need you to respect our privacy while we mourn." She stepped back and shut the heavy door in my face. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sharp, metallic snap. I stood on the porch for 2 full minutes. I did not bang my fists against the wood. I did not scream her name. I turned around, walked down the steps, and drove away. That was the day I surrendered. I accepted her narrative. I believed she had won the house, the money, and my father's legacy. But sitting in my apartment with the attorney letter in my hand, the narrative shattered. She had not locked me out to protect her grief. She locked me out to secure the paperwork. I folded the estate attorney notice and slid it into my pocket. The sun was beginning to rise over the Honolulu skyline, casting long shadows across my kitchen floor. I needed to see David Harrison. I needed to know exactly what the grandfather trust contained, and I needed to know how Sylvia planned to steal it. I parked my car in a cramped underground structure on Bishop Street. Downtown Honolulu hummed with morning traffic. Business professionals walked briskly past tourists in floral shirts. I carried a thick manila envelope containing the contents of the Yeti cooler. My steps were measured and precise. David Harrison operated his firm out of a high-rise building overlooking Honolulu Harbor. He was a 50-year-old estate attorney known for dismantling complex financial disputes with surgical efficiency. He did not waste time with pleasantries. His office smelled like lemon polish and expensive leather. A wall of legal texts framed the view of the Pacific Ocean. I sat in a heavy leather chair across from his mahogany desk. I unclasped the manila envelope and slid the contents toward him. My stepmother changed the locks on my childhood home the morning after my father died, I told him, keeping my voice steady. I walked away because I thought the house was the only asset left. I was wrong. I spread the documents across the polished wood. First, the intercepted life insurance policy. Then, the printed emails showing Sylvia impersonating me through a burner account to refuse the $150,000 payout. Finally, I placed the letter his own firm had sent to Sylvia, the one warning her about the grandfather trust and the Waikiki property registry. David picked up the insurance notice. He read the burner emails. His expression remained neutral, the practiced mask of a lawyer calculating liability. Mail fraud and identity theft, he murmured, adjusting his silver-framed glasses. This is a federal offense, Donatella. The United States Postal Inspection Service does not treat this lightly. If we submit this evidence, your stepmother faces significant criminal charges. I want the policy, I said, and I want her held accountable. She isolated a dying man to steal his money. David set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. We can certainly pursue the insurance policy. The fraud evidence is compelling. But my firm did not send that warning letter regarding the insurance alone. He tapped the thick watermark paper I had found at the bottom of the cooler. This was a standard cease and desist from our compliance department. We sent it because your stepmother attempted to initiate a secondary probate proceeding without listing you as an heir. She tried to fast-track the transfer of the primary estate. The primary estate is just the Manoa Valley house, and whatever savings he had left, I replied. She can have the house. I just want the insurance money she tried to steal from me. David looked at me. A subtle shift occurred in his posture. The detached legal professionalism tightened into something much sharper. Donatella, you do not understand what your stepmother has done. He pulled a wireless keyboard toward him and woke up his dual monitors. Let me pull the initial probate filing submitted to the state court by Sylvia's attorney 6 months ago. The mechanical clicking of his keyboard filled the quiet office. He typed a series of case numbers into a secure legal database. I watched his reflection in the glass window behind him. His jaw locked. When a person dies without an updated will, the state requires the executor to notify all legal heirs. David explained, his eyes scanning the digital text on his screen. If an heir cannot be found, the executor must file a sworn affidavit detailing their exhaustive efforts to locate the individual. They must publish notices in local newspapers and submit proof to the judge. He clicked his mouse. A scanned PDF document appeared on his left monitor. It bore the official seal of the Hawaii State Judiciary. This is the affidavit Sylvia filed, David said. His voice dropped an octave. She swore, under penalty of perjury, that you were estranged. She testified that your whereabouts were unknown and that you had severed all contact with the family over a decade ago. She provided the court with copies of returned mail. Mail she likely mailed to an incorrect address and intercepted herself. The audacity of the lie stole the air from my lungs. Sylvia stood on the porch, told me the house was hers, and then drove to a courthouse to legally erase my existence. She used the very silence she manufactured to convince a judge I had vanished. Because of this affidavit, David continued, the court bypassed the standard waiting periods. Sylvia was granted full control of the Manoa Valley house and your father's remaining cash accounts. She committed perjury to expedite the theft. I absorbed the information. The betrayal ran deep, but it was still grounded in the predictable greed I expected from her. So we file a motion to revoke the affidavit. We show the judge the intercepted mail. She loses the house. David did not nod. He did not agree. He stopped typing. His hands hovered over the keyboard. The rhythmic clicking ceased, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the office. He leaned closer to his monitor. He opened a new tab, accessing a different database. This one required a secondary security token. I watched his eyes track a long string of numbers across the screen. The color drained from David Harrison's face. A seasoned estate attorney, a man who dealt with multi-million-dollar disputes and bitter family feuds every day of the week, went entirely pale. He swallowed hard. His gaze shifted from the computer screen to the stack of intercepted mail on his desk, and finally, to me. "The insurance policy is a distraction," David said. His voice sounded hollow. "The house in Manoa Valley is a rounding error." I gripped the armrests of the leather chair. "What did you find?" David reached across his desk and slowly turned his primary monitor around so it faced me. The screen displayed a complex ownership matrix detailing a specific commercial land parcel. The address listed was situated in the heart of the luxury resort district in Waikiki. The cease and desist letter my firm sent referenced a grandfather trust. David began measuring his words with extreme caution. I assumed it was a modest family fund. I was wrong. He pointed to a specific line of text highlighted in yellow. Your grandfather did not leave a cash inheritance. He secured a commercial ground lease in Waikiki in 1974. It is a 60-year lease. The land currently sits beneath a major luxury hotel and retail complex. I stared at the screen. The legal jargon blurred together. My father never mentioned Waikiki property. He managed shipping logistics. Your father was a silent trustee, David explained. The trust was structured so he never owned the asset outright. He merely collected a modest annual dividend to manage the administrative filings. The legal structure mandated that upon his death, the entire ground lease transfers directly and exclusively to his sole biological heir. He tapped the screen. You. My pulse hammered in my ears. What is the value of a ground lease like that? David removed his silver glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Based on the current commercial zoning and the remaining duration of the lease contract, the asset value is approximately $35 million. The number hit the desk like a physical weight. $35 million. I worked 60 hours a week. I worried about the cost of groceries. I lived in an apartment with a rattling air conditioner, and I was the sole owner of a prime commercial parcel in the most expensive real estate market in the Pacific. Sylvia knows, I whispered. She saw the trust documents when he died. That is why she changed the locks. That is why she filed the perjury affidavit. She is trying to claim the lease. She cannot claim it through standard probate, David said sharply. The trust bypasses the estate entirely. It requires your biometric signature and an in-person notarization to transfer or sell the asset. Sylvia has no legal authority to touch it. Then why did she forge the email to steal a $150,000 insurance policy, I asked, my mind racing to connect the pieces. Why risk a federal crime for pocket change if she knows $35 million is sitting right there? David put his glasses back on. He turned the monitor back toward himself and typed another sequence into the registry database. He pulled up the pending transaction queue for the State Commercial Land Division. Because she isn't trying to claim the lease through probate, David said. His eyes widened behind the lenses. She is actively selling it. He clicked a final document and printed it. The laser printer in the corner hummed to life. He snatched the warm paper from the tray and slid it across the mahogany wood. This is an active escrow filing, David said, his tone urgent and tight. Sylvia has initiated a buyout of the ground lease with a mainland development group. They are purchasing the remaining contract rights to build a new luxury tower. The agreed sale price is $35 million. I looked at the escrow document. The timeline listed at the bottom of the page was bolded. The closing date is Friday, I noted. That is 3 days from now. Exactly, David said. If that wire transfer clears on Friday morning, the mainland developers take legal possession of the lease. Sylvia will immediately route the $35 million into an untraceable offshore account. The money will be gone forever. I stood up. The leather chair scraped against the hardwood floor. You just said she cannot sell it. You said the trust requires my specific signature, my physical presence. How is she closing an escrow on a commercial lease without me? David looked at the printed, forged emails from the Donna Murphy 808 account. He looked at the stack of intercepted mail. He looked at the woman who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of erasure. Donatella David said softly, "Look at the preliminary signature on the second page of that escrow document." I flipped the page. At the bottom, next to a notary stamp, was a signature. It read, Donatella Murphy. She did not forge that signature herself. David stated, his voice laced with dread, "The notary stamp belongs to a licensed agent who requires physical photo identification. Sylvia hasn't just stolen your mail. She hired a lookalike. She secured a counterfeit ID. She has someone physically posing as you to sign away your inheritance." The air in the office went entirely still. The stakes had just shattered the ceiling. This was no longer a dispute over a house or a life insurance check. It was a high-level corporate heist, and the clock was ticking down to zero. Suddenly, the phone on David's desk rang. The sharp trill shattered the silence. David glanced at the caller ID display. He looked at me. "It is Sylvia's attorney." Sylvia knew I found the cooler, and she was making her move. The sharp trill of the desk phone shattered the heavy silence in the office. The caller identification screen glowed with the name of a prominent downtown law firm. David Harrison looked at the flashing green light, then shifted his gaze to me. "That is Gregory Sterling," David said, his voice dropping to a low, cautious register. "He is the attorney who filed Sylvia's fraudulent probate affidavit 6 months ago. She must have called him the second Trent drove away from your garage." "Answer it," I told him. "Put it on speaker." David reached across the mahogany desk and pressed the illuminated button. "This is David Harrison." "David, good morning." A smooth baritone voice echoed through the office speakers. Gregory Sterling possessed the polished, frictionless tone of a man who billed $1,000 an hour to make rich people's problems disappear. "I am calling regarding the estate of the late James Murphy. My client Sylvia Murphy informed me of a rather unfortunate misunderstanding this afternoon involving her stepdaughter Donatella." "I'm sitting with Donatella right now," David replied. His tone remained perfectly neutral. A brief pause hung on the line. Sterling recovered quickly. "Excellent. That saves us a step. Sylvia is eager to put this family friction to rest. She recognizes that grief makes people behave irrationally. She would like to offer a formal peace offering to clear the air and finalize the probate proceedings. We are proposing an emergency mediation via video conference. In 1 hour." David hit the mute button. He looked at me, his silver-framed glasses catching the light from the dual monitors. "This is a trap," David whispered. "She knows you found the intercepted mail. She is terrified you will take it to the postal inspector and unravel her perjury regarding the Manoa Valley house. She wants to buy your silence before Friday. If she offers you a settlement, it will come with a blanket quitclaim deed." "What does that mean?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking in my chest. "A quitclaim deed surrenders your rights to everything," David explained, his eyes sharp. "If you sign it, you legally waive any future claim to your father's estate. More importantly, the fine print will include a waiver of all claims against Sylvia. It acts as a legal guillotine. You take her settlement, and you lose your standing to challenge the $35 million Waikiki lease transfer. You will give her a free pass to commit the identity theft." I looked at the glowing green light on the console. Sylvia thought I was a tired, overworked hotel manager who would fold at the sight of a 5-figure check. She thought the life insurance policy was the only secret I uncovered. "Tell him we accept," I said. "Send the video link." David unmuted the line and confirmed the appointment. He instructed his assistant to prepare the conference room. We walked down the hallway to a glass-walled meeting space overlooking the harbor. The water outside glittered under the midday sun, a stark contrast to the cold, clinical atmosphere inside the room. David logged into the video platform. A moment later, the screen flickered to life. Sylvia sat in the center of the frame. She was positioned in the living room of my childhood home. The sunlight filtered through the familiar plantation shutters, casting a warm glow over her impeccable posture. She wore a tailored beige blouse and her signature string of pearls. She looked like a woman burdened by the exhausting task of being the family anchor. Gregory Sterling sat beside her, exuding corporate confidence. "Donatella's sweetheart Sylvia began." Her voice dripped with the artificial sweetness she used to pack up my belongings when I was 14. "I was so distressed to hear about the tension with Trent today. Your father would hate to see us fighting over old paperwork and tax boxes." I forced my hands to unclench under the conference table. I had to play the part she expected. I slumped my shoulders slightly. I lowered my chin, mimicking the posture of a defeated, exhausted woman. "You hid my mail, Sylvia," I said, injecting just enough hurt into my voice to make it believable. "You hid birthday cards. You tried to reject a life insurance policy in my name." Sylvia sighed, a delicate, practiced sound of sorrow. She pressed a manicured hand to her chest. "I was protecting your father," she said, her eyes brimming with calculated tears. "He was so fragile at the end. Every time you failed to call, it broke his heart. I intercepted those letters because seeing them unanswered would have killed him faster. I made a poor judgment call out of love. I am sorry if it caused you pain." She spun the narrative flawlessly. She transformed a federal crime into a tragic act of devotion. Sterling leaned into the frame, taking over the tactical execution. "Donatella, we acknowledge the situation is emotionally fraught. To honor James's memory, Sylvia wishes to bypass any lengthy probate disputes. We have drafted a settlement agreement. Sylvia is prepared to offer you $50,000 from the estate savings account today. In exchange, you will sign a comprehensive waiver releasing all claims against the estate and Sylvia personally. You can take the money, start fresh, and put this heavy burden behind you." $50,000. She was offering me a fraction of my own father's savings to buy the runway she needed to steal $35 million. "It is a generous offer," David said, playing his role as the cautious advisor, "but we need to review the specific language of the waiver." "Of course," Sterling replied smoothly. "I will email the document to your office immediately." I stared at the high-definition monitor. Sylvia was looking at me with a faint, imperceptible smirk. She thought she had won. She thought the combination of a cash offer and the emotional weight of the living room background had broken my resolve. "I need time," I said, my voice wavering perfectly on cue. I looked down at my hands. "I cannot process this right now. Send the paperwork. Give me 24 hours to read it." Sylvia nodded, her expression softening into mock sympathy. "Take your time, sweetheart. We just want you to find peace." The screen went black. The silence in the conference room stretched for 10 seconds. I sat up straight. The posture of the defeated stepdaughter vanished. I looked at David. "She took the bait," I stated. "She did," David agreed, exhaling a long breath. "By giving you 24 hours, she believes you are neutralized until Thursday afternoon. She thinks she has secured a clear path to the Friday morning closing with the mainland developers." "So we go to the police," I said. "We show them the forged emails and the identity theft regarding the escrow?" David shook his head. He closed his laptop and folded his hands on the glass table. "The police move too slowly for a complex corporate fraud of this magnitude. If we file a report today, it will take weeks to assign a financial crimes detective. By the time they secure a subpoena, Sylvia will have finalized the transaction, wired the funds offshore, and boarded a one-way flight to a non-extradition country. We cannot rely on the authorities to stop the clock." "Then how do we stop the wire transfer?" I asked, feeling the pressure mount in the tight space of my chest. "We ambush the closing," David replied. His eyes held a fierce, calculated intelligence. "We walk into that boardroom on Friday morning and present undeniable proof of your identity to the mainland buyers and their title agent. The moment they realize they are participating in a fraudulent transaction, they will kill the deal themselves to avoid federal liability." "I have my driver license," I offered. "I have my passport." "Not good enough," David countered. Sylvia's look-alike used a counterfeit passport to notarize the preliminary documents. To the mainland developers, that woman is Donatella Murphy. If you walk in with a standard ID, it becomes a chaotic dispute over fake documentation. The title agent will freeze, but Sylvia might still find a way to push the wire through. David stood up and paced the length of the glass wall. "The grandfather trust was drafted in 1974, David explained, turning back to me. "Your grandfather did not trust digital records. He built a physical failsafe into the legal architecture. The trust stipulates that the final transfer of the ground lease must be authenticated by presenting the original watermarked trust deed. That specific document contains a unique biometric seal, a notarized thumbprint from your grandfather. It cannot be counterfeited. The title agent requires that physical document to legally close the escrow. If Sylvia needs it to close, I reasoned, then she must already have it. She does not, David said sharply. I checked the escrow registry notes. Sylvia's attorney filed an extension request this morning, claiming the original deed was delayed in a safe deposit transit. She's planning to use a certified copy to close the deal, relying on the fake ID to smooth over the missing original. David leaned over the table, bracing his weight on his knuckles. James was the silent trustee. He was the only person who knew where the original physical deed was stored. If he knew Sylvia was intercepting his life, he never would have kept a $35 million document in a standard filing cabinet or a bank box she could access. The rhythmic hum of the air conditioning seemed to amplify the silence that followed. Donatella David said, his voice tense. Where did your father hide the most valuable thing he possessed? I closed my eyes. The image of the Manoa Valley house materialized in my mind. I walked through the rooms in my memory. The living room, where my photos were erased. The damp downstairs bedroom. The hot, dusty garage. My pulse slowed. A specific memory surfaced, sharp and undeniable. The sea turtle navigates the entire ocean, but always knows how to find its way home. I opened my eyes. I looked at the estate attorney. I know exactly where it is, I said, but it is sitting inside the house Sylvia locked me out of. I told David Harrison the exact location of the physical trust deed. He stared at me across the glass conference table. The afternoon sun reflected off the harbor outside, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. My father hid a generational commercial lease inside a hollowed-out wooden sea turtle. He left it in a cardboard box in a hot, dusty garage. David removed his silver-framed glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. A dry chuckle escaped his throat. It was not a sound of amusement. It was the sound of a lawyer realizing the brilliance of a dying man. A bank vault leaves a digital footprint, David murmured. A safe deposit box requires an annual fee and a signature card. Sylvia monitored his bank statements like a hawk. If he rented a secure locker, she would have demanded the key. By hiding a bearer instrument inside a child's souvenir, he rendered it invisible to her financial audits. The relief of knowing where the document rested was short-lived. The physical location presented a fortress. Sylvia controlled the Manoa Valley property. She changed the deadbolts. She installed a monitored security system after she kicked me out. I could not just break a window and search the garage. Before we formulate an extraction plan, David said, his tone shifting back to clinical precision, we need to understand the exact nature of the forgery we are up against. We need to see the face of the woman stealing your life. He opened his laptop and angled the screen so we both had a clear view. He accessed a restricted portal managed by the State Notary Commission. Every commercial real estate transaction involving sums over $10 million requires digitized identity verification during the preliminary signing phase. The notary must scan the government-issued identification card and upload it to the secure state ledger. Sylvia initiated the escrow process 2 weeks ago. David explained, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. To bypass the biometric requirement of the grandfather trust during the preliminary phase, she claimed the original deed was delayed in transit, but the title agent still required the beneficiary to sign the initial intent to sell. Sylvia needed a physical body in the room. He hit the enter key. A digital file loaded on the screen. It was a high-resolution scan of a Hawaii state driver license. I stared at the image. The name printed across the top read Donatella Murphy. The birth date was correct. The listed address belonged to my small apartment in Kaimuki. The license number matched my own. But the photograph was wrong. The woman in the picture shared my olive skin tone and dark brown hair. Her jawline carried a similar structure. If a title agent glanced at the card and looked across a boardroom table, the resemblance was passable. But her eyes were too wide. The bridge of her nose lacked the slight bump I inherited from my father. Sylvia did not just forge a signature on a piece of paper. She hired a professional grifter. She procured a counterfeit identification card capable of passing a barcode scan. This elevates the situation significantly." David stated, his voice laced with cold urgency. "This is not a crime of opportunity. This is a syndicated operation." Sylvia likely used an illicit broker on the mainland to find a look-alike and manufacture the credential. I studied the face of the imposter. The contrast was jarring. I spent the first 18 years of my life watching Sylvia bake macadamia nut bread for neighborhood potlucks. I watched her arrange orchids and host holiday parties. Beneath that floral perfume and practiced hospitality, she harbored the calculating mind of a career felon. "We need to track the destination of the funds," David continued. He opened another window, pulling the routing instructions from the active escrow file. "The mainland developers are purchasing the remaining duration of the ground lease for $35 million. The title company holds those funds in a domestic trust account. On Friday morning, upon final execution of the documents, the money moves." He highlighted a string of routing numbers at the bottom of the escrow instruction sheet. "The receiving account does not belong to a local bank," David noted. "The destination is a corporate holding entity registered in the Cayman Islands." The reality of the timeline settled into the quiet room. Once the wire transfer clears the domestic Federal Reserve System, David explained the jurisdiction changes. The Cayman Banking Authority does not recognize our state court injunctions. If that money lands in that offshore account on Friday, it vanishes. Sylvia will board a flight the same afternoon. You will spend the next 10 years paying international litigators to chase ghosts, and you will never recover a single dollar. 72 hours. That was the exact window of time separating my current life from total financial ruin. The phone on the conference table rang. The sudden noise pierced the quiet tension. The caller identification display flashed. It was Gregory Sterling again. Sylvia's attorney was calling back sooner than expected. David and I exchanged a sharp look. I nodded. He pressed the speaker button. "David, we have the drafted quitclaim deed ready for your review," Sterling announced. His smooth baritone voice held a new layer of insistence. "I just emailed the secure document to your assistant. We appreciate the prompt turnaround," David replied smoothly. "Donatella requested 24 hours to review the terms." "There is a slight modification to the proposal," Sterling interjected. "Sylvia is willing to disperse the $50,000 settlement funds immediately. However, she feels very strongly about achieving closure in a respectful manner. She requests that Donatella sign the waiver in person." I leaned closer to the speaker. "Why is a physical meeting necessary?" "Sylvia wishes to hand you the cashier check herself," Donatella Sterling answered, adopting a comforting tone. "She wants to look you in the eye and ensure there is no lingering animosity. She proposed meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at the Manoa Valley House. The demand was not born of sentimentality. It was born of ego. Sylvia wanted to watch me surrender. She wanted to see me sit at my childhood kitchen table, accept a fraction of my own inheritance, and sign away my future. She needed the visual confirmation of her victory to soothe her own paranoia before the Friday closing. Her arrogance demanded an audience. "We will review the document," David said cautiously. "I generally advise my clients against unmediated physical meetings during tense estate finalizations." "I will be there," I said loudly, ensuring the microphone picked up my voice. A brief silence followed. "Excellent," Sterling said, his tone conveying deep satisfaction. "Sylvia will be delighted. We will see you tomorrow morning at 9. David terminated the call. He looked at me with open concern. "You cannot walk into that house alone," David warned. "She is baiting a trap. If she senses you are stalling, or if Trent searches your vehicle and finds the intercepted mail, the situation could escalate into physical danger. They are protecting a $35 million payout. People have disappeared for much less." I stood up from the glass table. I looked out at the harbor, watching a heavy cargo ship navigate the deep channel. The water was dark and unreadable. "She just handed me the keys to the fortress," I told him. "She wants me to sit in her kitchen and sign a fake document. She expects me to play the defeated victim. I will give her exactly the performance she desires." I turned back to David. "While she is busy gloating over my signature, I will ask for a glass of water. I will step away from the table. and I will walk into the garage and retrieve the carved wooden turtle. David crossed his arms. And if the garage door is locked, if Trent follows you, then I adapt, I replied. My voice held no tremor. I spent 15 years adapting to her quiet cruelty. I know the layout of that house better than she does. I know which floorboards creak. I know how the side door sticks if you do not lift the handle. She thinks she erased me from that property. She is about to learn that you cannot erase the foundation. David studied my face for a long moment. He recognized the hardened resolve. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a blank legal pad. If we are executing a heist, David said, his clinical precision returning, we need to map every variable. We have 48 hours until the mainland buyers sit down in the Waikiki boardroom. You secure the original biometric deed tomorrow morning. I will handle the mainland developers. The plan was set. The clock was running. I walked out of the high-rise building and into the Honolulu heat. Tomorrow morning, I would return to the house that locked me out. And I would steal back my life. The laser printer in the corner of David Harrison's office hummed, expelling 20 pages of dense legal text. The smell of hot toner and fresh paper mixed with the scent of leather furniture. David gathered the warm stack, tapped the bottom edge against his mahogany desk to align the sheets, and slid the document toward me. This was the physical manifestation of Sylvia's trap. The cover page bore the letterhead of Gregory Sterling's law firm. The title read, Comprehensive Settlement and Quitclaim Release. I rested my hands on the edge of the desk, staring at the black ink. Read Section 4, Paragraph 2, David instructed. His voice held the flat, clinical tone of a surgeon examining a severe fracture. I flipped through the crisp pages. The legal jargon was dense, designed to exhaust the reader before they reached the critical details. I found the specified paragraph and traced the lines with my index finger. The claimant, Donatella Murphy, hereby waives, relinquishes, and forever forfeits any and all rights, claims, or interests in all known and unknown assets, tangible or intangible, held in trust, probate, or otherwise associated with the late James Murphy. I lifted my gaze. Unknown assets, held in trust. It is a catch-all net, David confirmed. Sterling drafted this specific clause to immunize Sylvia against the Waikiki ground lease without explicitly naming the property. If you sign this document tomorrow morning in exchange for that $50,000 check, you retroactively validate her entire operation. You legally surrender your standing to challenge the counterfeit identity she is using to close the $35 million escrow. The audacity of the strategy was breathtaking. Sylvia was using a fraction of my father's own savings to finance the theft of my grandfather's legacy. I thought about her face during the video mediation earlier that afternoon. She had sat in my childhood living room, wearing her tailored beige blouse and her signature pearls. She had offered the money with a soft, mournful sigh, playing the role of the benevolent anchor holding a fractured family together. She had looked at the camera with a faint, imperceptible smirk, convinced she had outmaneuvered me. She believed I was desperate. She believed the isolation she forced upon me had left me exhausted and willing to accept scraps. The dramatic irony hung heavy in the quiet office. Sylvia thought she was negotiating over a forgotten life insurance policy and a suburban house. She had no idea I was holding the blueprint to her federal wire fraud. Playing the defeated victim is draining, I said softly, leaning back in the heavy leather chair. I hated lowering my chin on that video call. I hated making my voice shake to ask for 24 hours to think about it. It felt like stepping back into my teenage years, shrinking myself to fit the narrative she wrote for me. It is a tactical retreat, Donatella David replied. You gave her the exact performance her ego demanded. By asking for time, you fed her arrogance. You secured the runway we need. David closed the settlement document and pushed it to the side. He woke up his computer monitor and opened a new file directory. We need to focus on the mainland buyers, he said. Sylvia and Trent are amateurs playing a high-stakes game, but the people on the other side of that escrow are not. He turned the screen toward me. A corporate profile loaded. The logo displayed a sharp geometric mountain peak. Apex Vanguard Holdings. They are a private equity firm based out of Chicago, David explained. They specialize in aggressive commercial acquisitions. They do not care about family drama, forged emails, or stolen birthday cards. They only care about chain of title and legal liability. If we walk into that boardroom on Friday morning and verbally accuse Sylvia of identity theft, they will not just take our word for it. I studied the roster of corporate officers on the screen. Men in expensive suits with hard, unyielding expressions. We show them the intercepted mail. We show them the fake Donna Murphy 808 email account. Circumstantial, David countered. Sylvia's attorney will argue it is a domestic dispute over residential probate. He will point to the look-alike who notarized the preliminary escrow documents and claim she is the real Donatella. The title agent will face two women claiming the same name. In a chaotic he-said, she-said scenario, a ruthless firm like Apex Vanguard might pressure the title agent to push the wire transfer through and let the courts sort out the mess later. Once that money hits the Cayman Islands account, the game ends. He tapped a pen against the glass table. To shatter a $35 million deal, you cannot just raise a doubt. You must introduce a catastrophic legal defect. You need the original biometric deed. He pulled up a digital archival scan of a similar trust document from the 1970s to demonstrate the mechanics. Your grandfather anticipated fraud, David said, pointing to a circular emblem stamped at the bottom of the archival page. In 1974, digital encryption did not exist. High-value blind trusts utilized a proprietary physical authentication method. The notary required the beneficiary to press their right thumb onto a chemically treated ink pad. The ink bonded permanently with the cotton fibers of the heavy watermark paper. I looked at the dark ridged fingerprint on the screen. The title company handling Friday's closing knows this seal exists, David continued. They are currently accepting a certified digital copy of the deed to keep the escrow moving, but standard underwriting rules require physical inspection of the biometric seal before authorizing the final disbursement of funds. If you walk into that boardroom and lay the original physical deed on the table, it forces the title agent to verify the thumbprint. The lookalike Sylvia hired cannot replicate your biometric data. The moment the prints fail to match, the escrow dies. The weight of the impending confrontation settled over me. The entire $35 million heist hinged on a single piece of paper hidden inside a carved sea turtle. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I sit at my childhood kitchen table. I recounted tracing the sequence of events in my mind. I accept the $50,000 check. I pretend to sign the quitclaim release. I ask for a glass of water. I slip into the garage, open the box labeled James's Old Junk, and retrieve the turtle. It is a narrow window, David warned. Sylvia will be watching you closely. Trent will likely be in the house acting as muscle. You cannot afford a single misstep. I closed my eyes and mentally walked through the floor plan of the Manoa Valley house. I pictured the front door, the hallway, the archway leading into the kitchen. I envisioned the side door that opened into the stifling heat of the garage. Then a sudden chilling memory struck me. My eyes snapped open. I sat forward, my heart accelerating against my ribs. During the video call, I said, my voice tight, when Sylvia was sitting in the living room, "What about it?" David asked his pen, stopping in midair. "The background," I replied, visualizing the framing of the camera, behind her shoulder, near the entryway. There were cardboard boxes stacked against the wall, white, moving boxes. David frowned. She already moved into a condominium. She was just using the house as a backdrop for the mediation. "No," I insisted, the pieces clicking together with terrifying speed. "She told me earlier this week that she was clearing out the property. If she is preparing to stage the house for a residential sale, she is decluttering. She would not leave a pile of trash in the garage for a real estate agent to photograph." The realization drained the warmth from my hands. When I found the Yeti cooler, it had been shoved behind rotting drywall, abandoned because it held incriminating evidence. But the box containing my father's miscellaneous items, the box holding the wooden sea turtle, was not evidence to her. It was just clutter. If she ordered a junk removal service to clear the garage, I said the words tasting like ash, the turtle might not be in the house anymore. The simple retrieval plan evaporated. I was not just walking into hostile territory to pick up a hidden object. I was walking blind into a house that was being actively dismantled. If the box was gone, the deed was gone. If the deed was gone, the $35 million wire transfer would clear on Friday morning. David stared at me. The confident estate attorney looked genuinely alarmed. "You meet her in 14 hours, David said. If that carving is not in the garage, you have to find out where Trent moved it without alerting them to its value." The stakes tightened like a wire around my throat. Tomorrow was no longer a simple heist. It was a race against a dumpster. The drive back to my Kaimuki apartment felt suspended in time. The evening traffic along H1 moved in a slow, hypnotic crawl. Red taillights blurred together in the humid dusk. The air conditioner in my car rattled, blowing lukewarm air against my face. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to make my knuckles ache. 14 hours. I had 14 hours before I sat at my childhood kitchen table. If Sylvia had ordered a junk removal service, the carved koa wood sea turtle was already sitting in a municipal landfill. If it was gone, the $35 million Waikiki ground lease vanished with it. The mainland developers would execute the Friday wire transfer, relying on the fake identification card Sylvia purchased. The Cayman Islands holding account would swallow my grandfather's legacy, leaving no trace. I parked behind my apartment complex. The feral chickens that lived near the dumpsters scattered as my tires hit the gravel. I climbed the exterior concrete stairs, my legs feeling heavy and disconnected. I unlocked my door and stepped into the cramped kitchen. The faded blue Yeti cooler still sat on the linoleum floor, a silent monument to 15 years of stolen time. I pulled a chair out from the Formica table and sat down in the dark. I needed to think. I needed to crawl inside my father's mind and retrace his steps. I closed my eyes. The street noise outside faded, replaced by the rhythmic hum of my refrigerator. I slowed my breathing deliberately, regulating my pulse. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford when you are navigating a minefield. James Murphy was a meticulous man. He worked in shipping logistics, mapping complex freight routes across the Pacific. He understood contingencies. He understood variables. He knew Sylvia monitored his bank statements. She controlled the household budget, reviewing every grocery receipt and utility bill. He could not rent a safe deposit box without a monthly fee showing up on a ledger. He could not hire an external lawyer to hold the original biometric deed without an invoice triggering her suspicion. He had to hide a document worth $35 million in plain sight. He had to place it somewhere Sylvia would deem entirely worthless. I pictured the day he gave me the carved sea turtle. I was 10 years old. We were walking through the artisan market on the North Shore. The scent of roasted macadamia nuts and salt spray filled the air. He handed me the heavy wooden carving, its polished shell gleaming like dark glass under the afternoon sun. The sea turtle navigates the entire ocean, but always knows how to find its way home, he had told me. 4 years later, Sylvia arrived. She initiated her passive-aggressive campaign to erase me from the family narrative. The family photos vanished, my bedroom was repurposed, and the wooden turtle was exiled to the garage. Sylvia called it a decorative inconvenience. She told me it clashed with her modern coastal chic aesthetic. She tossed it into a cardboard box labeled miscellaneous junk. My father never objected. He never tried to rescue the carving from the garage. At the time, I thought his silence meant surrender. I thought he was choosing domestic peace over my feelings. But sitting in the dark of my apartment, the perspective shifted. He let her throw the turtle in the garage because the garage was her blind spot. Sylvia cared about appearances. She cared about the presentation of the living room, the dining table, the manicured front lawn. The garage was hot, dusty, and disorganized. She never spent time there. She never inspected the boxes piled behind the lawnmower. By allowing her to relegate the carving to the trash pile, he secured the perfect hiding place. I opened my eyes. The logic was solid. The execution was flawless. but my current problem remained. Did the box survive her recent decluttering campaign? I turned on the overhead light. I pulled my laptop from my work bag and opened a new browser window. If Sylvia was preparing to sell the Manoa Valley house, she would not haul the trash to the dump herself. She did not like to sweat. She would hire a local service. I typed a search query for residential junk removal companies servicing the Honolulu area. Dozens of results populated the screen. I filtered the list, focusing on companies that offered rapid deployment and estate clearing services. I needed to know if a crew had visited the address this week. I picked up my phone. It was past 8 in the evening. Most dispatch offices were closed. I found a company with a 24-hour emergency contact line. I dialed the number, preparing a specific persona. "Aloha Oahu Hauling," a gruff voice answered. The background noise sounded like a television playing a baseball game. "Hi, my name is Donatella," I said, pitching my voice slightly higher, adopting a flustered tone. "My mother, Sylvia Murphy, hired your company to clear out her garage in Manoa Valley recently. I think a box of sentimental family items accidentally got loaded onto the truck. Is there any way I can check the disposal yard?" The man paused. I held my breath, listening to the static on the line. "Murphy in Manoa Valley," he repeated, his tone shifting to mild annoyance. "Lady, we haven't serviced a residential call in that zip code in 3 weeks. Our trucks are booked solid with commercial jobs downtown. You have the wrong company." He disconnected the call. I exhaled a sharp breath. I scrolled to the next company on the list. I dialed the number. Voicemail. I left a frantic message using the same script. I repeated the process for 5 different local services. 2 went to voicemail. One operator told me they did not service the valley due to the steep driveway inclines. The 5th call connected to a dispatcher who sounded bored and tired. "Yeah, we have an outstanding work order for a Sylvia Murphy," he confirmed, typing on a loud mechanical keyboard. "The address is on East Manoa Road." My pulse spiked. "When was the pickup scheduled?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble. "Please tell me the truck has not gone to the landfill yet." The dispatcher sighed. "Lady, relax. The crew doesn't go out there until tomorrow afternoon. The work order is scheduled for a 2 o'clock arrival. They are hauling away 50 boxes of garage refuse and some old patio furniture." I closed my eyes. The tension in my neck muscles released just a fraction. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much. I will make sure the box is pulled aside before your crew arrives." I hung up the phone. The timeline was razor thin, but it existed. The junk removal truck was scheduled for 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. My meeting with Sylvia was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning. I had a 5-hour window to infiltrate the house, retrieve the turtle, and walk out the front door without raising an alarm. I walked into my small bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. The fluorescent light highlighted the dark circles under my eyes. I looked like a woman who had been awake for 3 days, fighting a ghost. I needed to look like a woman who was giving up. I dried my face with a towel. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. I needed an outfit that conveyed defeat. Nothing sharp, nothing tailored. I bypassed my professional hotel management suits. I selected a faded gray cardigan and a pair of simple dark jeans. I wanted to look small. I wanted Sylvia to feel enormous. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. I lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan. Tomorrow, I walk into the lion's den. I visualized the architectural layout of the property. The front porch led to a heavy oak door. The entryway opened into a formal living room. To the left, a narrow hallway led to the kitchen and the dining area. To the right, the hallway extended to the bedrooms. The critical choke point was the kitchen. The kitchen featured a side door that connected directly to the garage. During the meeting, Sylvia would insist we sit at the dining table. The dining area offered a clear line of sight to the kitchen. If I stood up and walked toward the garage door, she would see me immediately. Trent would likely be positioned in the living room, acting as a physical barrier between me and the front door. I could not sneak into the garage while they were watching. I needed a distraction. I needed a reason to break their line of sight long enough to slip through the side door, locate the box labeled miscellaneous junk, and retrieve the heavy wooden carving. I thought about the plumbing in that house. I spent 18 years living there. I knew its quirks. I knew the hot water heater in the downstairs bathroom required a specific sequence to reset. I knew the kitchen sink faucet possessed a faulty aerator that sprayed water sideways if you turned the handle too quickly. A faulty aerator. A plan began to form in the dark. It was risky. It relied on Sylvia's obsession with cleanliness and Trent's notorious impatience. If the timing was off by 10 seconds, Trent would find me tearing through a dusty box in the garage, and the entire operation would collapse into a physical confrontation. I closed my eyes, letting the rattle of the window air conditioner drown out the silence. I did not sleep. I spent the next 6 hours rehearsing every step, every word, every possible variation of the morning ahead. The sun rose over the Ko'olau Mountains, casting a pale gray light through my bedroom window. The alarm on my phone buzzed. I sat up. I put on the faded gray cardigan. I tied my hair back in a loose, messy knot. I looked in the mirror one last time, verifying the aesthetic of surrender. I picked up my car keys and walked out the door. The real heist was about to begin. The morning air felt heavy and thick with humidity as I pulled onto East Manoa Road. The familiar lush green ridge loomed above the roofline of my childhood home. I parked my car on the street directly behind Trent's lifted truck. I walked up the concrete steps. The new silver deadbolt gleamed in the bright sunlight. I did not have a key for this door anymore. I pressed the doorbell and waited. In the hotel industry, you learn to regulate your internal temperature when a guest is yelling in your face. You keep your breathing even. You lower your heart rate. You project a calm, subservient demeanor to de-escalate the tension. I applied that training now. I pulled the sleeves of my faded gray cardigan down over my knuckles. I let my shoulders slump. I adopted the physical posture of a woman who had given up the fight. Sylvia opened the heavy oak door. She wore a pristine white silk blouse and her signature string of pearls. Her smile was wide practiced and deeply hollow. "Donatella, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Come inside." I stepped over the threshold. The house smelled of synthetic vanilla and chemical lemon polish. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway, stacked 3 high against the floral wallpaper. The junk removal crew was scheduled to arrive in 5 hours. Trent sat on the beige linen sofa in the living room. He did not stand to greet me. He crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes tracking my every movement. He was positioned there to act as the designated intimidation factor. He wanted me to feel cornered. I kept my gaze lowered and followed Sylvia into the dining area. The mahogany table held a neat stack of legal documents and a blue cashier check. $50,000. Sylvia gestured to a wooden chair. "Have a seat, honey," Sylvia murmured, pulling out a chair for herself. "Let us put this heavy burden to rest. Your father would want us to find closure today." I sat down. I looked at the blue check, then at the thick quitclaim release. This document surrendered my rights to every asset associated with my father's estate. It was a legal guillotine designed to protect her counterfeit escrow closing tomorrow. I needed her away from the table. I needed Trent out of the living room line of sight. "Could I get a glass of tap water before I sign?" I asked, letting my voice waver just enough to sound fragile. My throat is very dry. Sylvia smiled, eager to play the gracious host one final time. She wanted to savor her victory. "Of course. Let me get you some ice." She walked into the kitchen. I stood up and followed her, stopping near the granite island counter. The kitchen sink was located exactly 10 feet from the side door that opened into the garage. Sylvia reached for a crystal glass in the upper cabinet. "Let me help," I offered. I stepped closer to the sink. I reached for the metal faucet handle. I knew the plumbing in this house intimately. The faulty aerator on this specific faucet required a gentle upward lift. If you forced it too fast, the broken mesh screen caused the water to deflect sideways. I gripped the metal lever. I shoved it upward with maximum force. The water pressure hit the broken screen. A harsh horizontal spray shot across the granite counter. Freezing water blasted directly onto Sylvia's pristine white silk blouse. Sylvia shrieked. She dropped the crystal glass. It hit the ceramic tile floor and shattered into dozens of sharp fragments. "My shirt," she gasped, waving her hands frantically. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" Trent bolted up from the sofa and sprinted into the kitchen. "What did you do?" he yelled, his heavy boots crunching on the broken glass. He grabbed a roll of paper towels from the counter and started ripping sheets off the cardboard tube. Sylvia and Trent focused entirely on the spreading puddle and the ruined silk fabric. I stepped backward, moving out of their peripheral vision. I turned the brass knob on the side door and slipped into the garage. The heat hit me instantly. The air inside the garage was stifling, smelling of old motor oil, damp cardboard, and dust. The space was packed with debris staged for the disposal crew. I scanned the Sharpie labels on the stacked boxes: holiday decor, winter clothing, kitchen pots. My eyes darted to the far corner behind the rusted chassis of my father's old lawnmower. 3 boxes sat stacked unevenly. The top box bore a faded, hastily written label: James, old junk. I crossed the concrete floor, my footsteps silent in my soft shoes. I ripped the packing tape off the top flaps. My heart pounded a rapid, punishing rhythm against my ribs. I dug through old tax receipts, a broken transistor radio, and tangled orange extension cords. My fingers brushed against something solid and smooth. I pushed the debris aside. The dark, polished curve of a wooden shell emerged from the clutter. It was the carved koa wood sea turtle. I lifted it from the box. It felt heavier than I remembered. The wood held a rich luster under the dim bulb of the garage ceiling. I ran my thumb along the bottom edge. A very thin seam circled the base of the carving. I gripped the top of the shell with my left hand and the flat base with my right. I twisted hard. The wood resisted, fused tight by years of tropical humidity. I gritted my teeth and forced it. A sharp click broke the silence in the sweltering room. The base unscrewed. A hollow cavity had been carved into the center of the wood. A single brass bank key dropped into my palm. I slipped the cold metal key into the pocket of my jeans. I reattached the wooden base, set the turtle back into the box, and folded the cardboard flaps down. I stepped back to the side door. I took a deep breath, smoothing my faded cardigan to ensure I looked perfectly composed. I pushed the door open and stepped back into the kitchen. Sylvia was furiously blotting her silk blouse with wet paper towels. Trent was using a broom to sweep the shattered crystal into a dustpan. Neither of them had noticed my brief absence. The chaos of the broken glass and the ruined shirt provided an impeccable cover. "I am so sorry," I whispered, maintaining the timid persona. The handle slipped out of my grip. Sylvia glared at me. Her artificial sweetness cracked at the edges, revealing the cold contempt underneath. "Just sit down and sign the papers, Donatella. Let us finish this." We returned to the dining table. I picked up the black ink pen. I stared at the quitclaim release. David Harrison had assured me that deliberate fraud negates a contract. By signing this document, I kept Sylvia complacent. I secured the runway for tomorrow morning. I signed my name on the dotted line. Sylvia snatched the paperwork the second my pen lifted from the page. She slid the blue cashier check across the polished wood. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket, right next to the brass bank key. I walked to the front door. Trent stood near the entryway, his broom still in hand. I did not look at him. I opened the door and stepped out into the bright Hawaiian morning. I walked down the concrete steps. I climbed into my car and started the engine. The piece of paper Sylvia held was worthless. The brass key resting against my thigh unlocked a $35 million truth. I shifted the car into drive. I did not head back to my Kaimuki apartment. I steered the car toward the downtown financial district. It was time to open the vault. I drove straight from the Manoa Valley house to the downtown financial district. The noon sun beat down on the pavement, baking the asphalt. I met David Harrison in the lobby of a regional bank on King Street. The air conditioning inside the building provided a sharp, freezing contrast to the tropical heat outside. I reached into my pocket and handed him the brass bank key. We walked down a flight of marble stairs into the vault room. The heavy steel door stood open, guarded by a manager who verified David's legal standing as an officer of the court. We navigated a narrow aisle of metal deposit boxes. The walls gleamed with polished steel. It was quiet down here, insulated from the city noise above. David located the correct number sequence. He inserted a master key into the left slot. I inserted the brass key from the wooden turtle into the right slot. We turned them simultaneously. The internal mechanism clicked. I pulled the long metal drawer from its housing and carried it to a private viewing booth. I lifted the lid. Inside rested a single manila envelope, yellowed with age. I broke the brittle wax seal and slid the contents onto the table. It was a thick document printed on heavy cotton paper. The typeface carried the distinct, uneven ink impression of a manual typewriter from the 1970s. The text detailed the establishment of a generational blind trust securing the commercial ground lease in Waikiki. I flipped to the final page. At the bottom of the sheet, next to a faded notary stamp, was a dark, ridged fingerprint. The biometric seal. The ink had bonded permanently with the cotton fibers over the decades. David leaned over the table examining the print with profound reverence. "This is the sword," David whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the small metal room. "Sylvia possesses a counterfeit identification card and a fake signature. We possess the unalterable biometric truth." We placed the deed into a secure, waterproof briefcase. I walked back out into the blinding sunlight, my chest feeling lighter than it had in 6 months. The weapon was loaded. The target was locked. I returned to my Kaimuki apartment as evening fell over the island. The sky transitioned from a brilliant orange to a deep, bruising purple. I did not turn on the overhead lights in my kitchen. I sat at the Formica dining table, letting the shadows stretch across the room. The faded blue Yeti cooler sat in the corner, holding the intercepted letters that started this entire chain of events. I pulled my phone from my pocket to check my email. A notification flashed on the screen. It was an alert from a mutual social media contact. I tapped the icon and navigated to Trent's public profile. He had posted a photograph 30 minutes ago. The image showed Trent leaning against the hood of a sleek silver sports car at a luxury dealership in Honolulu. The vehicle was a high-end European model, the kind that cost more than a residential mortgage. He wore designer sunglasses, even though the sun was setting. He held a cup of espresso in one hand, flashing a smug, entitled grin at the camera. The caption beneath the photograph read, "Big moves tomorrow. #blessed." I stared at the glowing screen. The arrogance radiated from the digital image. Trent was already spending $35 million before the wire transfer even initiated. He felt so untouchable, so shielded by his mother's deception, that he was publicly flaunting his stolen wealth. He relied on a foundation of perjury and identity theft to finance his ego. I did not feel a spike of anger. I felt no urge to throw my phone across the room. I experienced a sensation of pure, cold clarity. In the hospitality industry, you witness genuine wealth and you witness projected wealth. People who earn their status walk quietly. People who steal it always need an audience. Trent and Sylvia required validation. They needed the sports car. They needed the luxury offshore accounts. They needed me to sign a fake document in a dusty kitchen to prove they had won. I locked my phone screen and set the device face down on the table. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet door. Tomorrow was not a day for a faded gray cardigan. Tomorrow was a day for armor. I reached past my casual clothing and pulled out my best professional attire. It was a tailored charcoal blazer and matching sharp trousers. The fabric was crisp, holding precise lines. I paired it with a stark white button-down shirt. I laid the garments flat across my bed, smoothing the lapels. I retrieved my black leather shoes from the rack and polished the toe caps until they reflected the dim light from the hallway. The ritual of preparation grounded me. I reflected on the nature of quiet endurance. When I was 14 years old, Sylvia packed my childhood memories into boxes and banished me to a damp downstairs room. I did not scream. I carried my belongings down the stairs in silence. When my father died and Sylvia changed the deadbolt on the front door, I did not bang my fists against the wood. I turned around and walked away. They mistook my silence for weakness. They equated my lack of resistance with surrender. But screaming burns energy. It gives the opponent a target. Quiet endurance builds stamina. You let the enemy dig their own grave. You let them scheme and manipulate. You let them purchase sports cars and draft fake quitclaim deeds. You let them walk right up to the edge of the cliff, convinced they have wings. My phone vibrated against the hard surface of the kitchen table. The sudden buzzing broke my deep concentration. I walked back into the kitchen and picked it up. David Harrison was calling. I answered the line. "The logistics are confirmed," David announced. His voice was tight, stripped of any casual inflection. "The private equity firm from Chicago, Apex Vanguard Holdings, is currently airborne. The mainland developers are flying over the Pacific Ocean as we speak. They land late tonight." "What is the exact time and location?" I asked. "The closing is scheduled for 10 o'clock tomorrow morning," David replied. "The venue is a high-rise corporate suite on Kalakaua Avenue, right in the center of Waikiki. The title agent will be present in the boardroom to authorize the release of the escrow funds. Sylvia and Trent are scheduled to arrive at 9:30 to prepare the final signatures." I told him I had my tailored suit ready. I told him I would meet him in the lobby of the corporate high-rise at 9:45. "Get some sleep," Donatella, David advised. "Tomorrow requires total precision. We only get one shot to dismantle a $35 million transaction." I ended the call. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out over the city. The lights of Honolulu stretched out toward the dark horizon of the ocean. Somewhere in Manoa Valley, Sylvia was probably packing her final boxes, dreaming of a Cayman Islands bank account. Somewhere in the city, Trent was admiring a silver sports car, convinced his future was secured. They were sleeping soundly, unaware that the ghost they tried to erase was holding the deed to their destruction. I walked back into my bedroom. I picked up my phone and set my alarm for 6 o'clock in the morning. The trap was fully set. Tomorrow I would walk into a glass boardroom and tear their world apart with a single piece of paper. Kalakaua Avenue hummed with the chaotic energy of mid-morning tourist traffic. The sun beat down on the pavement, reflecting off the luxury storefront windows lining the boulevard. I stood on the sidewalk outside the towering glass facade of the corporate high-rise. I wore the charcoal blazer and the tailored trousers. The crisp fabric felt like a layer of armor. I adjusted my cuffs. I took a slow, measured breath. David Harrison waited near the revolving doors. He held the waterproof briefcase tight against his side. He wore a dark navy suit projecting the ruthless efficiency of a veteran litigator. We did not exchange a greeting. A nod was sufficient. We walked through the revolving doors into the expansive, air-conditioned lobby. Security personnel manned a long marble desk near the elevator banks. In the hospitality industry, you learn a crucial lesson about human behavior. Gatekeepers rarely challenge people who act like they own the building. Hesitation invites scrutiny. Confidence acts as a universal keycard. I kept my gaze fixed on the destination. I did not glance at the guards. I walked with the deliberate, unhurried stride of an executive running late for a board meeting. David mirrored my pace perfectly. We bypassed the security desk and stepped into an open elevator car just as the metal doors began to slide shut. The car ascended in near silence. The digital floor indicator ticked upward. 10, 15, 20. I watched the numbers glow. My father spent his entire career in shipping yards and humid warehouses. He calculated freight weight and diesel costs using a clipboard and a pocket calculator. He never stepped foot in a high finance suite. Yet his quiet foresight, hidden inside a wooden souvenir, was about to dismantle a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition. I felt a profound connection to him in that small metal box. I was carrying his final chess move to the board. The elevator chimed softly on the 30th floor. The doors parted. We stepped onto plush, woven carpet that absorbed the sound of our footsteps. The air up here felt sterile and chilled, carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne and roasted coffee. A receptionist sat behind a curved glass desk down the hall, engrossed in a quiet phone conversation. We ignored her. We turned the corner and walked down a long, wide corridor lined with modern art prints. At the end of the hall, a glass-walled boardroom jutted out, offering a sweeping panoramic view of Waikiki Beach and the vast turquoise expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The transparent walls were designed to showcase power and transparency. Today, they served as a display case for a heist. I slowed my pace as we approached the thick glass. The scene inside unfolded like a silent, high-stakes theater production. Sylvia sat at the head of a massive mahogany conference table. She wore a tailored beige dress and the familiar string of pearls. She offered a warm, practiced smile to the men across the table, but the tight cords in her neck betrayed her underlying anxiety. Trent sat to her right. His right knee bounced in a rapid, erratic rhythm under the table. He repeatedly checked the heavy dive watch on his wrist. He looked like a man waiting for a getaway car. Across from my step-family sat the 3 representatives from Apex Vanguard Holdings. The mainland developers wore dark, severe suits. They possessed the sharp, impatient posture of men who flew across an ocean solely to sign a contract and fly back. They did not care about the view. They cared about the bottom line. At the far end of the table, a title agent worked on a silver laptop. She organized a neat stack of blue folders containing the escrow instructions. A small digital security token rested next to her keyboard, flashing a dynamic authorization code. She was preparing the final wire transfer forms. In a matter of minutes, $35 million would leave a domestic trust account and vanish into a Cayman Islands holding entity. David offered a brief nod. I reached for the heavy chrome handle of the boardroom door. I pressed the metal latch and pushed. The thick glass door glided open on its premium hinges, but the vacuum seal broke with a distinct audible hiss that cut through the low murmur of conversation. Every voice inside the room ceased. 7 heads turned toward the entryway in unison. The title agent paused, her fingers hovering an inch above her laptop keyboard. The lead developer from Chicago narrowed his eyes, clearly annoyed by the unscheduled interruption. Sylvia registered my face. The polished, grieving widow persona evaporated in a fraction of a second. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray. Her practiced smile shattered, replaced by an expression of pure, cornered panic. She realized I was not sitting in my Kaimuki apartment. She realized the $50,000 quitclaim deed she secured yesterday was a phantom victory. Sylvia stood up so quickly her heavy leather chair scraped sharply against the hardwood floor. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Her voice cracked, lacking the honeyed tone she used for the public. She turned a frantic gaze toward the title agent. "Security needs to be called immediately. This is a private meeting. These people do not belong in this building." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I walked slowly past the entryway, my polished black shoes making deliberate, measured steps across the floor. I moved toward the center of the long mahogany table. I let the silence stretch, forcing her panic to echo against the glass walls. Trent shoved his chair back. He stepped into the narrow space between the wall and the table, puffing out his chest. He intended to use his size to block my path and assert control. He took a heavy step forward, raising his right arm to grab my shoulder and physically remove me from the room. David Harrison stepped smoothly in front of me, his posture rigid and unyielding. He held the waterproof briefcase firmly in his left hand. "If you make physical contact with my client," David stated. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that commanded instant authority. "I will have you arrested for assault before the ink dries on the police report. Sit down." Trent hesitated. His arm hovered in midair. He looked at the stern estate attorney, then glanced at the 3 executives from Chicago. The mainland developers were watching the exchange with deep, calculating scrutiny. Trent realized physical violence in front of a private equity firm would obliterate the deal. He lowered his arm. He slowly backed away and sank into his chair, his bravado wilting under the gaze of actual wealth and power. I bypassed Sylvia entirely. I did not acknowledge my stepmother or her erratic breathing. I stopped at the exact center of the table. I directed my attention exclusively to the lead developer from Apex Vanguard. He was an older man with silver hair and a sharp, discerning gaze. He looked at me, evaluating the tailored charcoal suit, the unbowed posture, and the litigator standing at my side. I placed both hands flat on the edge of the polished mahogany wood. I met the lead buyer's eyes and delivered the truth. You are about to purchase stolen property. The lead developer from Chicago did not blink. He was a man accustomed to volatile corporate negotiations and aggressive takeover tactics. He had likely witnessed dozens of hostile board meetings. But the phrase stolen property regarding a $35 million transaction commands a specific type of attention. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the mahogany table. "Excuse me," the developer said, his tone low and dangerously calm. He directed his gaze at Sylvia, then back to me. "Who exactly are you?" Sylvia slammed her hands onto the table. The sudden movement rattled the coffee cups nearby. Her voice cracked, scaling an octave as she desperately tried to reclaim control of the narrative. "Do not listen to her," Sylvia shouted, pointing a trembling, manicured finger in my direction. "She is an estranged, unstable relative. She vanished a decade ago and broke her father's heart. Now she shows up trying to extort money from his grieving widow. The probate court already ruled against her. She has zero legal standing in this room. Security! We need security!" Her panic echoed against the thick glass walls. The performance was frantic, lacking the polished, artificial sweetness she usually employed. The mainland developers exchanged a brief, skeptical glance. Wealthy investors abhor emotional volatility during a closing. It signals legal exposure. I did not raise my voice to match her screaming. I maintained the low, steady cadence of a hotel manager addressing an unruly guest. "My name is Donatella Murphy," I stated, addressing the Chicago executive directly. "I am the sole biological heir to James Murphy. More importantly, for the purposes of this escrow, I am the exclusive designated beneficiary of the Waikiki commercial ground lease you are attempting to purchase." The title agent, a young woman sitting near the window, stopped typing. She looked at the blue folders on her desk, then looked at me. "Ma'am," the title agent said hesitantly, "we already verified the identity of Donatella Murphy during the preliminary signing phase 2 weeks ago. The biometric scans passed state compliance." I looked at the young woman. "A forgery passed compliance." I corrected gently. "The woman who sat in that chair and handed you a driver license was an imposter, hired to facilitate a wire fraud. You verified a counterfeit credential." Sylvia gasped, a sharp, ragged sound of feigned outrage. "That is a lie. That is a malicious, defamatory lie. She is trying to ruin this family." I ignored her. I nodded to David Harrison. The estate attorney stepped up to the edge of the table. He laid the waterproof briefcase flat on the polished wood. The 2 sharp clicks of the metal latches opening sounded like a gavel dropping in a silent courtroom. David lifted the lid and removed the manila envelope. He pulled the thick, heavy cotton paper from the sleeve and smoothed it across the center of the table. "This is the original trust deed," David announced, his voice carrying absolute, undeniable authority. "It was drafted in 1974. It establishes the generational blind trust currently holding the Waikiki parcel. As you can see, paragraph 3 explicitly voids any external power of attorney regarding the sale of this asset. My client's stepmother possesses zero legal authority to authorize this transaction." The attorney representing Apex Vanguard Holdings stood up. He walked swiftly around the table to inspect the document. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his suit pocket. He leaned over the heavy cotton paper, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. Furthermore, David continued tapping the bottom corner of the vintage document. "The trust charter requires physical authentication for a final transfer of ownership. You will note the biometric seal next to the notary signature." The mainland attorney focused on the dark ridged thumbprint bonded to the paper fibers. "My client is willing to provide a live biometric sample to the title agent right now," David offered, gesturing to me. "We are confident the fingerprint will match the archival standard. We are equally confident that if you ask the woman who signed the preliminary documents to do the same, the prints will fail to align. You are currently processing an escrow based on grand theft identity." The color drained from the mainland attorney's face. He was staring at a document that proved his firm was inches away from wiring $35 million to an international grifter. He looked up at the lead developer from Chicago. The attorney gave a single, rigid nod. The deal was toxic. Sylvia realized the legal argument was collapsing. She attempted to pivot back to the emotional defense, relying on the perjury affidavit she filed in probate court. The court granted me control. Sylvia insisted, her voice shrill and desperate. She abandoned her father. I have the returned mail to prove it. She never cared about him until she found out about the money. I took care of him. I earned this. Her defense rested on the illusion of my absence. It was time to shatter that illusion permanently. I reached into the deep pocket of my tailored blazer. My fingers wrapped around the rusted iron metal. I pulled the heavy snapped padlock from my pocket and dropped it onto the mahogany table. The heavy metal clattered loudly against the wood, sliding a few inches before coming to a rest near the title agent's laptop. I reached into my other pocket and withdrew a thick stack of envelopes bound by a tight rubber band. I dropped the bundle next to the padlock. I watched Sylvia's eyes track the rusted metal. I watched her recognize the faded blue tint on the edge of the top envelope. The breath caught in her throat. The frantic energy drained out of her, replaced by a cold, paralyzing terror. She knew exactly what I had placed on the table. She recognized the Yeti cooler contents. "You locked me out of the house the morning after he died, Sylvia," I said. My voice was chillingly calm. "You changed the deadbolts because you thought I was a threat, but you made a critical error. You forgot to burn the evidence." I untied the rubber band. I spread the intercepted mail across the table, ensuring the postmarks and the handwritten return addresses faced the Chicago developers. "These are birthday cards," I stated, pointing to the blue envelopes. "These are graduation gifts. These are letters from my father asking why I never returned his calls." My stepmother intercepted my mail for 15 years to manufacture the estrangement she just referenced. I pulled the printed email thread from the bottom of the stack and slid it toward the lead developer. "More relevant to your current liability," I continued, tapping the printed sheet. "She created a burner email account using my name to fraudulently reject a life insurance policy payout 3 years ago. This establishes a documented, long-term pattern of mail fraud and digital identity theft. The woman sitting across from you is not a grieving widow making a clerical error. She is running a syndicated financial fraud operation. If you authorize the release of those funds today, your firm becomes an active participant in a federal crime." The glass boardroom went dead silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to roar in the quiet space. The lead developer from Apex Vanguard did not ask another question. He did not demand further clarification. Private equity firms survive by calculating risk. The risk threshold in this room had just crossed into federal indictment territory. He looked at the original biometric deed. He looked at the stack of intercepted mail. Finally, he looked at Sylvia, his expression conveying absolute freezing contempt. The executive stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He did not say a word to Sylvia or Trent. He looked at his attorney and the 2 other representatives from Chicago. "Pack it up," the lead developer ordered. "We are done here." The mainland buyers moved with swift, ruthless efficiency. They snapped their briefcases shut. They gathered their laptops and their unexecuted contracts. The title agent, realizing she was caught in the middle of a massive fraud, rapidly closed her blue folders and shut down her secure terminal. She grabbed her security token and practically sprinted toward the door. "Wait," Sylvia pleaded, standing up and reaching across the table. Her voice was a broken whisper. "Please. We can negotiate. We can adjust the price. We can fix the paperwork." The lead developer paused near the heavy glass door. He looked back at Sylvia, his eyes entirely devoid of sympathy. "You do not have a paperwork problem, ma'am," the executive said sharply. "You have a prison problem. Do not ever contact my firm again." He pushed the door open. The mainland buyers walked out of the boardroom in a tight, disciplined formation. They marched down the plush, carpeted hallway toward the elevators, leaving the $35 million escrow dead on the table. The heavy glass boardroom door drifted shut on its hydraulic hinges. The latch engaged with a soft, final click. The executives from Chicago were gone. The title agent was gone. The $35 million wire transfer vanished into the ether, evaporating before it ever reached the Cayman Islands. The silence inside the room was absolute. It was the specific, suffocating quiet that follows an explosion. Sylvia stood frozen near the head of the mahogany table. Her hands hovered over the empty space where the escrow contracts had rested just moments before. The pristine white silk blouse she wore looked suddenly stark and severe against her pale, ashen skin. Her carefully constructed 15-year illusion had not just cracked, it had disintegrated. The polished widow persona, the weaponized aloha, the sweet, honeyed voice that masked her quiet cruelty, it all lay in ruins, across the polished wood, buried under a stack of intercepted birthday cards and a rusted padlock. Her knees buckled. She collapsed heavily into her leather executive chair. The breath shuddered out of her lungs in a long, ragged exhale. Trent remained standing near the window, his broad shoulders slumped. The arrogant posture he carried into the room, the aggressive swagger that fueled his public social media posts, evaporated completely. He stared blankly at the empty chairs across the table. His jaw worked silently as his brain struggled to process the magnitude of the loss. "My car," Trent stammered, his voice thin and hollow. "I put down a non-refundable $50,000 deposit on the allocation hold yesterday. I leveraged my entire credit line against the expected payout. The dealership expects the balance tomorrow." He turned his panicked gaze toward his mother. "Mom, what do we do? The dealer will seize the asset. The bank will call the margin loan." Sylvia did not look at him. She stared at the original biometric trust deed resting in the center of the table. The dark, ridged fingerprint anchored to the bottom of the page mocked her elaborate forgery scheme. She realized she had spent weeks plotting a high-level corporate heist without verifying the fundamental architecture of the target asset. Her arrogance blinded her to the failsafe my grandfather engineered. She lifted her head and looked at me. The panic in her eyes morphed into something darker, a desperate, cornered animal instinct. When the legal defense crumbles and the intimidation tactics fail, the manipulator always retreats to their final stronghold, the guilt trip. Genuine tears welled in Sylvia's eyes. They were not crocodile tears performed for a neighborhood audience. They were tears of profound, self-centered terror. Donatella Sylvia pleaded, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "You do not understand what I sacrificed. You do not know what it cost me." She leaned forward, pressing her hands against her face, allowing a sob to escape her throat. "I took care of him for 18 years. When his heart started failing, I was the one making the doctor appointments. I was the one managing his medication schedules. I sat up with him through the long nights when he could not breathe. I bathed him. I fed him. I held his hand while he faded away." She dropped her hands, fixing me with a look of aggressive entitlement. "You were managing a hotel. You were living your own life in Kaimuki. You were not there to bear the burden of his decline. I earned that money, Donatella. I earned security for myself and my son. Your father owed me a future. You cannot just walk in here and take it all away." I looked at her tears. I listened to the raw desperation in her voice. In the hospitality industry, you observe people justify terrible behavior by highlighting their own perceived victimhood. They believe their suffering grants them immunity from the consequences of their actions. I felt no sympathy. The cold clarity that guided me through the morning remained unbroken. I did not flinch under her weeping gaze. Making pot roast and scheduling doctor appointments does not entitle you to forge a dying man's name. Sylvia, I said, my voice steady and unyielding. Caring for a sick spouse does not grant you the right to hire a professional grifter, counterfeit a government identification card, and attempt to wire $35 million offshore. I pointed to the stack of intercepted mail. And it certainly does not entitle you to intercept a father's letters to his daughter. You did not protect him. You built a cage around him. You manufactured my absence so you could monopolize his gratitude. You isolated him to secure your payout. Do not dare frame your greed as a sacrifice." Trent took a step toward the table, his face flushed with sudden, misdirected anger. "You have your $35 million, he spat, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You won. You stopped the sale. So let us walk away. My mother keeps the Manoa house and the cash savings. We stay in our lane, you stay in yours. We never have to see each other again." He thought the negotiation was over. He thought the loss of the ground lease was the extent of the damage. He still believed the foundation of their theft was secure. I glanced at David Harrison. The estate attorney had stood silently by my side, allowing me to dismantle the emotional manipulation. Now it was time to drop the final, devastating legal blow. David adjusted his navy suit jacket. He reached into his waterproof briefcase one last time. He withdrew a single sheet of heavy legal paper bearing the gold embossed seal of the Hawaii State Judiciary. He placed it on the mahogany table and slid it precisely across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of Sylvia. "The transaction regarding the Waikiki ground lease is indeed canceled," David stated, his tone devoid of any warmth. "However, the legal consequences of your actions extend far beyond this boardroom." Sylvia stared at the embossed seal. Her trembling hands hovered over the document, terrified to touch the paper. "What is this?" she whispered. "This is an emergency injunction issued by the probate court judge early this morning," David explained, delivering the words with the rhythmic precision of a ticking clock. "My office filed an ex parte motion detailing your actions regarding the primary estate. We provided the court with sworn testimony and photographic evidence of the intercepted mail you hid in your garage. We also provided the printed emails demonstrating your attempt to fraudulently reject the life insurance policy." Trent stared at the paper, the color draining from his face. "What does the injunction do?" "It revokes the original probate order," David answered cleanly. "When you filed the sworn affidavit claiming Donatella was estranged and her whereabouts were unknown, you committed perjury to expedite your control of the estate. Because the initial filing was secured through deliberate fraud, the judge has vacated your claim to the primary assets." The air in the room grew heavy, suffocatingly still. "Effective immediately," David continued, "you are stripped of your status as the executor of James Murphy's estate. The court has frozen the joint savings accounts. Furthermore, your legal claim to the Manoa Valley property has been nullified, pending a full criminal investigation." Sylvia gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of air. "No, no, you cannot do that. That is my home. That is my house. I changed the locks." "You changed the locks on a house that no longer belongs to you," David corrected her sharply. "The title reverts to the estate, and as the sole biological heir, Donatella will petition for full ownership during the revised probate hearings. Your greed has not just cost you the $35 million lease. It has cost you the modest assets you had already stolen. You have lost the house. You have lost the cash. You have lost everything." The magnitude of the ruin crushed Sylvia into her chair. The panicked tears ceased, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. She looked at the emergency injunction. She looked at the original biometric deed. Finally, her gaze drifted to the rusted iron padlock resting near the intercepted birthday cards. She had initiated this entire sequence of events to secure absolute wealth. She had orchestrated a 15-year campaign of quiet cruelty to ensure she controlled the narrative. And in her desperate rush to steal a fortune she never earned, she exposed the very lies that protected her modest security. The silence returned to the boardroom, thick and heavy. Trent stood frozen by the window, realizing the bank would call the margin loan on his sports car tomorrow morning, and he had absolutely no assets left to cover the debt. Sylvia sat motionless, staring at the physical evidence of her own destruction. They were trapped in the wreckage of their own making, and the most devastating part of their collapse was the undeniable reality that I did not have to raise my voice to tear their world apart. I just had to let them read the paperwork. I looked at the woman sitting at the head of the mahogany table. Sylvia's posture had completely collapsed. Her shoulders hunched forward, her spine curving under the invisible, crushing weight of total exposure. The pristine white silk blouse she wore now seemed absurdly out of place, a final, fragile costume clinging to a shattered actor. Her hands rested limply in her lap, palms upturned, staring blankly at the emergency court injunction that had just evicted her from the only security she possessed. Trent had backed away from the table entirely. He stood pressed against the glass wall overlooking the Pacific Ocean, his gaze fixed on the floor. The heavy titanium dive watch on his wrist caught the morning light, a glaring reminder of the massive margin loan he could no longer repay. The dealership would repossess the silver sports car by the end of the week. The bank would seize his remaining credit lines. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of inherited wealth, and the foundation had just evaporated beneath his expensive loafers. In a cinematic narrative, this is the moment the protagonist is expected to deliver a fiery monologue. The audience anticipates a loud, dramatic crescendo of righteous anger, a cathartic release of 15 years of accumulated pain. The hero is supposed to pound their fists on the table, hurl insults, and revel in the immediate suffering of the villain. But reality operates on a different frequency. Genuine victory does not require volume. The loudest person in the room is usually the one with the weakest argument. When you hold all the cards, you do not need to flip the table. I felt no urge to yell. The cold, analytical clarity that had guided me through the morning remained absolute. I did not want to sink to their level of emotional manipulation. I did not want to grant them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. My silence had been my armor for over a decade, and I refused to discard it now. I leaned forward slightly, resting my fingertips on the polished edge of the table. "I did not come here to ruin you, Sylvia," I stated. My voice was calm, measured, and entirely devoid of malice. I spoke with the objective finality of a judge reading a verdict. Sylvia did not lift her head. A slight tremor ran through her shoulders, a physical manifestation of the panic settling into her bones. "You did that yourself the moment you hid that first letter." I continued my words, landing softly in the quiet room. "You manufactured my absence. You isolated a dying man to secure your payout. You forged documents, hired imposters, and committed perjury. Every consequence you face today is the direct result of a choice you made. You locked me out of the house because you thought I was a threat. The truth is, the only threat to your future was your own greed." I stepped back from the table. I turned to David Harrison. The estate attorney nodded once, a gesture of profound professional respect. He moved with swift, practiced efficiency. He gathered the intercepted birthday cards, the printed burner emails, and the heavy iron padlock. He returned them to the manila envelope. He carefully lifted the original biometric trust deed, ensuring the vintage paper remained pristine, and secured it inside the waterproof briefcase. He snapped the metal latches shut. The sharp clicks echoed loudly against the glass walls, a definitive punctuation mark concluding the operation. We did not wait for a response. There was nothing left to negotiate. There were no terms left to discuss. I turned my back on my stepfamily. I walked toward the heavy glass door, my polished black shoes moving in a steady, unhurried rhythm across the hardwood floor. David fell into step beside me. I did not look back over my shoulder. I did not need to witness their despair one last time to validate my victory. The paperwork on the table spoke louder than any parting insult ever could. We pushed through the boardroom doors and stepped out into the plush, carpeted hallway. The air outside the conference room felt instantly lighter, stripped of the toxic, suffocating tension that had defined the morning. The receptionist down the hall was still engrossed in her phone conversation, completely unaware that a $35 million federal wire fraud had just been dismantled 100 feet away. We walked toward the elevator banks in silence. The rhythmic prose of the morning echoed in my mind, finalizing the narrative arc of the last 15 years. She wanted the Manoa Valley house. She wanted the cash savings. She wanted the offshore accounts. She wanted me entirely erased from my father's legacy. In her relentless pursuit to consume everything, she triggered a chain reaction that stripped her of the only assets she actually possessed. In the end, the only thing Sylvia erased was her own future.
David pressed the call button. The digital indicator above the metal doors lit up immediately. The elevator car arrived with a soft chime. We stepped inside the polished metal box. The doors slid shut, severing the visual connection to the 30th floor suite. The descent was smooth and rapid. I watched the floor numbers tick downward in reverse order. 20, 15, 10. With every passing floor, the crushing weight I had carried since I was 14 years old began to lift. The invisible pressure that forced me to shrink my posture, to lower my voice, to accept the margins of my own family history, dissolved into the chilled air of the elevator car. I had spent my entire adult life believing I was an unwanted burden. I had accepted the narrative of my own exile, but the truth was locked inside a wooden sea turtle the entire time. My father had loved me. He had anticipated the betrayal, and he had engineered a flawless, unassailable defense. He had trusted me to find my way home. The elevator chimed a final time, arriving at the ground floor. The doors parted, revealing the expansive sunlit lobby of the corporate high-rise. We walked past the marble security desk and pushed through the revolving doors. We stepped out onto the bustling sidewalk of Kalakaua Avenue. The midday sun beat down on the pavement, bright and intense. The chaotic noise of tourist traffic, the hum of city buses, and the distant rhythmic crash of the Pacific Ocean hitting the Waikiki shoreline washed over me. It was the sound of a normal, uninterrupted Tuesday morning in Honolulu. The city continued its daily rhythm, completely indifferent to the corporate war that had just concluded in the sky above. David stopped near the curb. He adjusted his grip on the waterproof briefcase. He looked at me, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his severe litigator persona. The transfer documents for the Waikiki ground lease will take a few weeks to formally process through the probate court, David informed me, his tone shifting back to logistics. We have to navigate the procedural fallout of the emergency injunction, but the asset is secure. The trust is uncontestable. The lease belongs exclusively to you. I looked up at the towering glass facade of the high-rise building. I thought about the $35 million valuation. I thought about my cramped Kaimuki apartment, the rattling window air conditioner, and the 3 working stove burners. The financial reality of the situation had not fully integrated into my consciousness yet. The numbers were too large to comprehend in a single morning. "Thank you, David," I said, extending my hand. "I am aware this operation required a significant deviation from standard estate proceedings. I appreciate your precision." David shook my hand firmly. "You provided the necessary leverage, Donatella. I simply applied the pressure. I will contact you tomorrow morning to discuss the timeline for reclaiming the Manoa Valley property." He turned and walked down the crowded sidewalk, merging seamlessly into the flow of downtown professionals. I stood alone on the avenue for a long moment. The tropical heat warmed the shoulders of my tailored charcoal blazer. The victory was quiet, paper-based, and devastatingly permanent. I had not fired a single physical shot, but I had won the war. I walked toward my parked car, ready to close the final chapter. The immediate conflict was resolved, but the institutional gears of justice were just beginning to turn. The fallout from a failed federal wire fraud does not end in a boardroom. It ends in a courtroom. 14 months have passed since the morning I walked out of that glass boardroom on Kalakaua Avenue. Time moves at a different velocity when you are no longer holding your breath. I stand on the wooden deck of the lanai wrapping around the Manoa Valley house. The afternoon trade winds carry the scent of damp earth and blooming ginger down from the lush green ridge. I rest my hands on the wooden railing. My father painted this specific railing the summer I turned 12. I can still feel the slight uneven grain in the wood where he missed a spot sanding it down. I hold a brass key in my right hand. It is not the key to a hidden bank vault. It is the new key to the front door. The probate court judge finalized the estate transfer last autumn. The eviction of my stepfamily was a matter of public record, executed by county sheriffs on a humid Tuesday morning. I hired a locksmith the very next afternoon. I stood on the front porch and watched him drill out the shiny silver deadbolt Sylvia installed the day after my father died.
The metallic grinding sound of the drill biting into the lock cylinder was the exact frequency of closure. The title reverted back to the bloodline. The house belongs to me now.
The gears of federal justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Apex Vanguard Holdings kept their word. Private equity firms do not appreciate being leveraged as unwitting accomplices in international financial crimes. Their corporate attorneys forwarded the forged escrow documents directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The United States Postal Inspection Service matched that inquiry with the evidence David Harrison submitted regarding the intercepted mail. Federal agents arrived at Sylvia's temporary luxury condominium unannounced on a Thursday morning. They executed a search warrant authorized by a federal judge who had personally reviewed the contents of the Yeti cooler. The government treats the retention and destruction of citizen correspondence as a severe breach of law. When prosecutors combined the mail offenses with the wire fraud charges regarding the Cayman Islands routing numbers, the legal threshold escalated beyond simple civil fines. Sylvia currently resides in a federal holding facility awaiting trial. She faces a multi-count indictment for wire fraud, identity theft, and postal offenses. The government froze her remaining personal bank accounts to secure potential restitution. The polished widow persona, the beige silk blouses, the carefully curated island hospitality, none of those tools function inside a courtroom. She tried to manipulate the federal prosecutors using her tears and her rehearsed victimhood during the initial depositions. The prosecutors responded by reading her own forged emails back to her on the official record. Trent experienced a much faster, much sharper descent. The luxury dealership repossessed the silver European sports car 48 hours after the Waikiki deal collapsed. He had leveraged his existing credit lines to float the non-refundable deposit, anticipating a multi-million-dollar windfall to cover his tracks. When the offshore wire transfer failed to materialize, his creditors called the margin loans. His financial ruin was swift and mathematical. He filed for bankruptcy early this spring. He currently works a wage job on the Windward Coast, learning the hard lesson that unearned arrogance is a debt that always comes due. My own financial reality shifted into a new paradigm. The Waikiki commercial ground lease transitioned into my name without further contest. The title agency authenticated the biometric thumbprint on the 1974 trust deed. My grandfather's foresight held firm. I received the quarterly commercial lease payments directly. Taking control of the asset involved endless meetings with tax attorneys and wealth management advisors. I learned the intricate details of commercial zoning laws, corporate taxation, and generational trust maintenance. I sat in high-rise offices similar to the one where I dismantled Sylvia's heist, but this time I sat at the head of the table. The developers from Chicago actually reached out a few months later with a legitimate legal offer to purchase the lease. I declined. Some things are not for sale. I prefer collecting the residual income and watching the sunset over the property my grandfather secured. I moved out of the cramped Kaimuki apartment. I left the rattling window air conditioner and the broken stove behind. But I did not buy a European sports car. I did not post photographs of my bank accounts on social media. People who understand the value of a dollar do not need to perform their wealth for strangers. I invested the funds into diversified, low-risk portfolios, utilizing the same quiet patience my father taught me. I kept my job managing the boutique hotel for another 6 months, simply because I enjoyed the work, before stepping down to manage my own assets full-time. I turn away from the lanai railing and walk through the sliding glass doors into the main living room. When I first walked back into this house after the eviction, it felt like stepping into a time capsule. Sylvia had packed most of her designer clothing and expensive decor, but she left behind the mundane debris of a rushed departure. I spent 3 weeks cleaning the rooms. I hired contractors to rip up the carpets she installed and restore the original hardwood floors. I peeled the floral wallpaper off the hallway walls, scraping away the aesthetics she used to cover my history. I approached the brick fireplace. The wooden mantelpiece is no longer crowded with studio portraits of Sylvia and Trent wearing matching white shirts on pristine beaches. I boxed those photographs up and mailed them to Trent's defense lawyer.
Instead, a single framed photograph sits in the center of the wood. It is a picture of my father and me, taken at the North Shore Artisan Market when I was 10 years old. He is looking down at me, a rare, genuine smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. I reach into my pocket. My fingers brush the smooth, polished shell of the carved koa wood sea turtle. I kept the carving with me during the entire transitional year, a physical anchor reminding me of the long game. I place the wooden turtle on the mantelpiece, resting it gently right next to the framed photograph. The dark wood gleams in the afternoon light. The base remains fused tightly to the shell. It does not hide a brass bank key anymore. It just holds the memory of a man who fought a quiet war from the shadows. My father was not a perfect man. He avoided confrontation. He allowed a manipulative woman to build a wall between us because he lacked the emotional vocabulary to tear it down himself. For a long time, I mistook his silence for surrender. I thought he had abandoned the field. I understand now that strength does not always look like a raised fist. Sometimes, strength looks like a man enduring years of quiet misery, carefully studying his opponent's blind spots, and hiding a generational fortune inside a child's toy. He knew he could not outsmart Sylvia in a screaming match. He knew he could not dismantle her daily psychological warfare, so he chose a different battlefield. He chose the slow, unbreakable power of institutional paperwork. I step back from the fireplace and look at the room. The silence in this house no longer feels heavy or isolating. It feels like peace. If the last 15 years have taught me anything, it is a profound lesson about the nature of human conflict. We are conditioned to fear the loud threats. We are taught to brace for the screaming, the sudden hostility, the aggressive posturing. But true danger is rarely loud. True danger is a sweet voice offering you a glass of water while it steals your inheritance. It is a warm smile covering a calculated theft. Truth possesses a different kind of stamina. Fraud relies on speed and confusion. It requires fake identification cards, burner email accounts, and rushed escrow closings to maintain the illusion. Truth does not need to rush. Truth is inherently patient. It can sit in a dusty cardboard box in a hot garage for a decade. It can wait inside a sealed bank vault. Truth understands that lies require constant maintenance, but facts simply exist. And eventually, the truth always leaves a paper trail. My name is Donatella Murphy. I'm 33 years old, I live in Manoa Valley, and I own the ground beneath my feet. They can change the locks, but they cannot change the deed. Like, subscribe, and tell me what is the biggest lie you ever caught someone in. I will see you in the next story.